Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink with another Christmas card and another card using Simon Says Stamps Winter Flower stamp set. My previous video used this set and there was a comment asking if I would use it on black watercolor paper with the distressed watercolor pencils. I wasn't in the mood to use black watercolor paper, but I love me some Kraft heavy stock, especially with the watercolor pencils. Plus, I was like, ooh, it would be really nice to make a 5x7 card because I mentioned that in the last video, how big this image was and how nice it would be for a card that size. So I took some Kraft heavy stock. This is not your standard Kraft cardstock or like Need in a Desert Storm that I also love. This is distress heavy stock. This stuff is pretty unique. I have not yet come across anything similar to this, and I've been doing this for 2 decades. It is thicker and it's got, I want to say texture to it, but it's still smooth. It's texture smooth. I've used it in a bunch of videos and I love it. I love it. It is, again, chef's kiss. So I cut down a panel. I put it in my MISTI. I used my anti-static powder tool. And I'm inking up the big winter flower image with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. And I'm going to use clear embossing powder. You could stamp this in clear and use black embossing powder. If you've got the cojones for that, all the power to you. I've mentioned this before. I don't mess around with black embossing powder. It takes one time. You knock over a container that into carpet. Never again. It's just, no. This is the best way. I have a container of black embossing powder for certain things, but I prefer to stamp in black, emboss in clear. It's better. I also wanted to heat emboss this because you could just stamp it and watercolor it like I'm going to do. However, because I'm using the distressed watercolor pencils, they are quite opaque. Like they'll sit on top of the cardstock, so they would sit on top of the stamping. So what normally you would need to do then is you would stamp it, color it, and then you would need to stamp the image again because you would not see most of the stamp lines. So that is an option. I was like, I would rather just heat emboss because that's always, even for me, the most nerve-wracking thing is stamping it that second time after you spent all the time coloring it. And so often I have stamped it the second time and it was off, I messed it up and it's like, ugh. So heat embossing for the win. So like I said, I'm using distressed watercolor pencils. This is my little palette. I did a dedicated video talking about this, using the shavings, making this little palette, everything. I will have a link to that video at the end of this video if you haven't seen it. For me personally, this is how I prefer to use the distressed watercolor pencils. I cannot color with like color pencils, watercolor pencils, things like that. I haven't been able to do it for years. Like I can do it. I have borderline carpal tunnel and I've had it for a lot of years. And I have just learned to avoid things that will aggravate it because it has to get pretty extreme before, you can get surgery, that sort of thing. And I kind of can't do that, especially when I do this as a job. So I just avoid it. So having this little palette and coloring it with it this way works wonders. And I genuinely prefer it. So I put little drops of water, and you don't even have to do that. I put drops of water in the colors I was thinking I was going to use. It'll, dry and they'll be good to go later. But that just helps soften everything a little bit more. But honestly, these are so water reactive that you don't need to like pre-moisten and all those things. It's not necessary. Like you can just swirl a wet brush and pick up the color that way. You can also use the watercolor pencils and pick up the color directly from the tip. You can color with watercolor pencils and then watercolor them out, whatever floats your boat. This could also most likely work with like oxide inks, even regular watercolors, really. Like just experiment with what you got, I've mentioned this a lot. I have a lot of coloring options, not just because I do this as a job, but also because I genuinely enjoy having like 15 million options, to color something. It's always been like that. Oh, even when I was a kid, I liked having like crayons and color pencils and my little paints and, all the things. So, I've super sped this up. in editing. Basically, all I was doing was swirling my wet brush in the color, applying it to the image, and then pulling it out with a brush that was clean with water. And then I would sort of mix colors. So for the poinsettia, I was using, I honestly can't, because I don't even have my watercolor palette labeled. People ask me that too, like what, I just put them in rainbow order, but I didn't label anything because I just go by the color. But I'm pretty sure I used, was it Candied Apple? I'm positive. It was Candied Apple and I think Fired Brick. Yeah, Candied Apple and Fired Brick for the poinsettia. For the big leaves, I did my go-to with like anything distress when it comes to greens. Rustic Wilderness and Twisted Citron, because those two together are life to me. And then these smaller leaves, I got a little crazy and did peacock feathers, mowed lawn. I'm pretty sure. Was it mowed lawn? Peacock feathers. I'm just like looking at the backs of these containers. That would, no, it wouldn't be mowed lawn. There isn't a mowed lawn. Shocking. Must have been crushed olive. Peacock feathers, crushed olive, and a little, like, just little bit of, what is the darkest blue? Prize ribbon. So I used those three for these other leaves. And again, while I was coloring this, these watercolor pencils, because just what's in them and the pigments, everything, even on top of heat embossed images, like if I just let, like you can see it on the center here that I added, you know, the yellow. If I just left that, it would have dried and like it would have just been a yellow blob because it'll sit on top of the heat embossing as well. It's just the nature of the what's in them. So sometimes I would just take my clean brush and just kind of wipe on those areas and then it's good to go. So then for the little berry branches, I used, no, not Villainous Potion. I used Seedless Preserves, and I think Vintage Photo. And then this is when I, you know, went outside the lines with the brown and I was like starting to clean it up. And then I was like, oh, messy watercolor. I'm going to do it. I want to see what it looks like with these pencils on the Kraft HEAVYSTOCK. So I did this on purpose. And I know right now it looks like a hot mess, but just bear with me. Bear with me. I know what I'm doing. And besides, even if I didn't, I'm adding splatter regardless, and that fixes everything. But I just would wet areas and I would pick up a little bit of the color and you can see how it dried. Like when it's wet, especially on anything other than like regular white watercolor paper, if you're using black or this Kraft HEAVYSTOCK or just anything that isn't white, when it's wet, you can see those wet areas. So those kind of look a little weird. So always remember that it's once that dries, it's going to look a little different. So that, you know, messy outside the lines that I did looks completely different once it's dry. And I've just got these like little bits of color here and there outside the lines. And I personally love it. You don't have to do that, but I love it. Same with the splatter. If you don't like splatter, you don't got to do it, but you know, I'm gonna like, you know, it's coming. So I used my Gonzai Tombi Starry Colors again and did the two colors of splatter. I did the white gold and the yellow gold. I let this dry. And then once it was dry, I trimmed this panel down just a little bit more. I ended up trimming it to, I think, 4.5 by 6.5. Yeah, because I wanted a nice border around, the panel on my card base. I'm actually going to like measure this now because I think that's what I did. I know I don't often share measurements because more often than not, it just doesn't matter. But yeah, 4.5 by 6.5. That's what I did. And then while I had my big old guillotine trimmer out, I trimmed down my white cardstock to 10 inches by 7 inches. And then I will score this at 5 inches. So this will be a 5 by 7 note card. And I'm using Simon's 120-pound heavyweight white cardstock for my card base. And then, of course, my Teflon bone folder, my little Score Buddy. Same old, same old. So made my card base. And then I grabbed a piece of just a scrap of this like teal colored cardstock, put it in my MISTI, and I'm just going to heat emboss the Christmas word from that winter flower stamp set. So anti-static power tool. I'm going to stamp this word a couple times with clear embossing ink, just to make sure I got the whole thing stamped cleanly. And then this I'm going to coat with just white embossing powder. I'm going to melt that with my heat tool. And then off camera, I just trim that down into a little strip and trimmed it at a little angle, you know, just cause. So I trimmed that down And then I took the sentiment out of my MISTI. I'm going to reposition the stamp. I've made my card base inside out. So I have the inside facing up here. Lined up that big winter floral image, and I'm stamping it with Simon's khaki ink. I went with this slightly darker brown because the Kraft HEAVYSTOCK is a bit more intense, if that makes sense, in the Kraft realm compared to like Nina Desert Storm. So I stamped that, and again, this gives you a good idea of like just how big this image is. Live. And then I stamped sentiments from that same set with the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. And then off camera, I die cut some red cardstock scraps and some red glitter paper with the CZ Design Mary word die. I didn't use the outline, I just used the word. So die cut those, and then I'm going to stack those together with Kraft tacky glue. So I've got a bit of dimension. So I've got the 2 layers of just the red cardstock, and then the top layer is going to be red glittery fabulousness. So adhered all those together, and then I'm going to adhere those to my card front, again just using the Kraft tacky glue. So my background has, like, you can see me, like I kind of gently bend it a little bit because it had warped a bit with the watercoloring. I could have taped it down originally, didn't bother. It's going to be fine. And when I adhere this to my card base, that's going to flatten it out, so I just don't worry about it. So I adhered my sentiments to the panel. And then I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to cover the back of this with Simon's Big Mama foam tape, because this will give it a little bit of dimension, not a lot. This foam tape is the thinnest I've ever come across. I've never come across any other foam tape that is as thin as this. They call it Big Mama because the size of the roll is enormous. Those of you that have got a roll of this know exactly what I'm talking about. It is like vinyl record huge, which some children are not going to understand that. Although vinyl records have kind of come back. Anyway, it's a massive roll. So go to the back of this panel with that foam tape, peel off the backing, and then I'm going to pop this onto the card base. So once I get this popped into place, I gotta add a little bit of bling. So I pulled out, I've got the PinkFresh Essentials, these little glitter drops that they came out with. Was this a month ago, 2 months ago, whenever it was. I mentioned it in a video that, because I was, I've told you guys I have like multiple lifetimes worth of bling, and I remember mentioning that I was like, and I have ordered more, and I did, and I've been hoarding them because they're just in their little packages and they're glittery and they make me happy. Did I need them? No, but I wanted them, and again, they make me happy. They're pretty, so I pulled them out. I was gonna do like multiple colors of bling, but I held myself back and I just added some of the aqua ones. They're just pretty. So once those were adhered into place, this card is complete. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, I'll link to my previous video using this set. In that video, I have links to 2 other videos I've done. You just got to follow the breadcrumbs. I'll link to the Distress Watercolor palette video, and then of course to my Holiday 2022 playlist, because I've done a whole bunch of videos this year. And I'm still going. I'm enjoying this, and I'm glad you guys are too. So, as always, thank you so much for watching, thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!